It's trying. Well, that did not work, but that's okay. We will record this meeting, so we'll be able to share it with folks for later then. Let me go ahead and do that. All right. All right, y'all. Well, we'll keep letting folks in as they come through, but I'm going to go ahead and get started. If I could see my screen here. Here we go. For folks that are just joining us, go ahead. We'd love to see where y'all are from. If you want to drop your name and your location in the chat. But I'm so excited for y'all to join us for tonight's virtual event, Home for the Holidays at Goodnight Ranch, Cultivating Community at the Dinner Table and Beyond. I've met some of y'all I haven't, but I'm Danielle Blanco. I'm one of the development managers at the Friends of the Texas Historical Commission. The FTHC is the nonprofit partner to the THC, the Texas Historical Commission. We provide philanthropic support. We provide philanthropic support for historic preservation efforts across the state. And of course, you can always learn more about us at our website at thcfriends.org. Thank y'all so much that those that have joined us before, those of you that have supported us with donations for these events, we're just so grateful for your support and being able to continue this program. I do see that there's a few of our board members as well as some of my colleagues at the THC, so excited that y'all are on today. And then if y'all haven't followed us on social media, please do. We'd love to connect with you. This is also another way that you can find out about other virtual events or even just other events that we do in person. Our next virtual event is not going to be until February. We skip January. We take a little break. So February 20th, 2025. I can't believe I had to say 2025 in that sentence, will be our next virtual event. So keep your eye out for that information. A few quick housekeeping notes before I introduce our amazing presenter today. We would so appreciate if y'all can keep your mics on mute throughout the presentation. We'll do a Q&A at the end. So as you have questions, please drop them in the chat. I will keep track of them throughout. So feel free to drop them in just as the question pops up in your head. And then tomorrow morning, everybody who registered for the event will get an email with a link to the recording of the event that you can share with friends and family or just watch again for yourselves. And then we'll also provide a list of resources or links or anything that we share today that you might be able to go back and visit in the future. So it is now my privilege to introduce our wonderful presenter for this evening. Excuse me, y'all. Madeline Van Lunen. She is the site educator at the Charles and Marianne Goodnight Ranch State Historic Site. A native of St. Louis, Missouri, Madeline has a deep passion for women's history with a particular focus on the life of pioneer Marianne Goodnight. This interest led her to relocate to Amarillo, Texas, where she pursued her dream career as a public historian at Goodnight Ranch. She's dedicated to the belief that local history serves as a powerful tool for strengthening communities and plays a vital role in shaping better futures. I think everybody on this call can agree with that last sentence. So with that, I am gonna mute my mic and I am gonna hand over the reins to you.
All right. Well, hi guys. Just gotta share my screen real quick. Hopefully y'all can see that just fine. It is so delightful to be here today. Oh, what did I just do? Technology, am I right? I gotta go back to there we go. Okay. Well, I just want to thank all of you for attending this program today. You are certainly in store for some really wonderful stories. My name is Madeline Van Lunen. I'm an educator at the Charles and Marianne Goodnight Ranch State Historic Site. And I thought with it being the holiday season, why not use the opportunity to explore the stories of the kindred spirits that visited the Goodnight Ranch during the holiday season when the Goodnights hosted their community and gave back in meaningful ways. This legacy of compassion and joy persists today at the stories we tell here. And I thought, well, it's Christmas, so of course, this giving back is going to be more evident. And so why not explore these stories that are both bittersweet and unforgettable? Now, I wanted to start off by asking my audience a question, and you can leave your answers in the chat. But what things come to mind when you think of Christmas today? So we'll start off with that little question. So, the overall basis of Christmas has not changed much since its inception. It's about giving back to your community, right? Whether it be family, friends, or neighbors. Presents are passed around underneath the Christmas tree, and a beautiful feast is usually being prepared in the kitchen for all to enjoy. And to be fair, Christmas, even in Victorian times, was very much like this, albeit slightly different. They actually would decorate their Christmas tree with candles, which kind of shocks me. I would be afraid that my Christmas tree would go up in flames. They also would decorate it with ribbon, dried fruits, little presents, and even furniture in mini, which I still don't understand. But to them, it just made this tree even more appealing to the eye. And underneath the Christmas tree, of course, were all the presents wrapped in beautiful paper that had familiar patterns of hollies, birds, and angels. So Victorians really went above and beyond, especially those who were wealthy. They could afford such presents, such wrappings and decorations. Not only that, but their meal usually tended to be multi-course, and the centerpiece was a big bird, usually a turkey. But you can imagine you had to be wealthy to have these things. And having such a turkey and a feast was a symbol of prestige. Now, most of the pioneers that were moving to the Panhandle, they too celebrated Christmas, but they had a lot of financial limitations. They didn't have resources readily available. And so I thought, why not explore this through a story, right? Because it will really speak to that sense of community and how people would come together in the wintertime when life was so much harder because of the weather. These people were just merely surviving with what they had. And I thought the story that I came across online was just so bittersweet. Reminds me of the story I'm going to tell afterward. But this story is from the recollections of Miss C.W. Jones, who fondly remembered her seventh Christmas at the Matador Ranch as a little girl. And while she was there, she was living in a dugout like many of the other pioneers in the area. And they decided that it would be best to have the Christmas gathering at Joe Browning's dugout because he had the largest one in the community and it would accommodate all of the jovial guests. So they gathered in his dugout. And the centerpiece of this gathering at Christmas was the china berry full of yellow balls with white cotton trimming. And hanging from its branches were wreaths made from agarita bushes. Now, they're native to Texas, so you probably have heard of them before, but they look very much like holly, so they're just absolutely gorgeous. Another thing decorating the tree were little toys that had been gifted years prior. And Miss Browning, the matriarch of the Browning family, went out of her way to travel 120 miles south of Matador Ranch to Colorado City, Texas, to pick up gifts that would soon be cherished and opened by all of the little ones attending this Christmas celebration. The girls, they were gifted dolls, while the boys, they received these really nice boots. Once the gifting session was over, they were then ready to move on and have their beautiful Christmas feast. And then after that, it was followed by this beautiful dance that brought everyone together at Matador Ranch. This is a photo of Matador Ranch in either 1878 or 1879. So this is what life looked like for these pioneers. As you can see, there's not much to this structure, right? But they were making the best of what they had, and they still had beautiful moments, especially this time of the year. And that brings us to the Goodnights, who, like the Brownings, saw the daily struggles of pioneers living in their own community and wanted to give back, especially during the holiday season when the wind was brisk and it was cold, and just made life more difficult. Their generosity and warmth during the holiday time will be explored in the following story that we know and love telling at the ranch today. Herbert Timmons' 1894 Christmas visit to the Goodnight Ranch, recalled several decades later for the Amarillo Sunday Globe News on December 25th, 1949. So shortly after the town's incorporation in 1888, Commodore Timmons, a rancher and farmer from Wise County, Texas, brought his family to Goodnight. As you can probably already tell, the Timmons were probably just blown away by this landscape because of how flat it was and how it lacked trees. So keep this in mind as we go further with this story. So they come to live in Goodnight in November 1894, and immediately Herbert Timmons was hired on as a ranch hand at the Goodnight Ranch by Mr. Goodnight himself. Less than a month later, Mrs. Goodnight would personally invite Herbert Timmons to her annual Christmas dinner. You know, this was so important to Herbert, who had few means. I mean, he was growing up in a two-room house in Goodnight. There was only one stove that was not only heating the home, but allowing them to cook and warm up water for a bath. But getting that water was a whole nother list of chores, so they had to go out of their way to find a river or a spring or a well that would allow them to get that water, and then they had to haul it back in trips, and just slowly heat it up so they could take their warm bath in the dead of winter. So it wasn't easy. And on top of that, you probably already know this, but the plains doesn't have trees, right? So what were they using to keep that fire going? Well, in this case, they were using bison chips. And here's a great photo of a sister with her little brother out on the plains of Kansas, picking up bison chips. But more than likely, the Timmons family also had to do this, just to get a fire going, because they didn't have anything else. There was no wood, coal was expensive, and so you relied on bison chips just to get through the winter time. That meant they were going out into these fields, probably in blizzard-like conditions, just to get fuel for their fire. And food, well, certainly they did have food, but most of what they were eating, they would grow and then pick in the summer, or, in the early fall, and then they would can, pickle. If it was meat, they would smoke it. And if they didn't have much of anything at all, they could rely on other families to have those resources, and then they could come together and share them at the dinner table. So you're probably getting this image of a really desolate frontier that is very hard to deal with. And that's exactly what it was like for these people. Now, the Goodnights were no exception, actually. When they came to the Panhandle, they were the first white settlers, and isolation was very much the tone of those early settlers who came here. They were constantly longing for friends and families that they had left behind to come to a strange new land. You can imagine how the Timmons boys and girls must have felt coming here after establishing roots in East Texas. This made holidays even more important as it was a reprieve from hard work and allowed people to come together and celebrate, emotions of joy, hope, and appreciation. I know Marianne, when she first came here, she found joy by actually making friends with animals. When she was at the JA Ranch, a cowboy brought her 3 chickens to cook up and eat, and instead of doing that, she made them her pets and they followed her all around the ranch. And that is what brought her joy because her nearest, closest neighbor was 75 miles away, Mrs. Bugby, and she saw her every 8 to 12 months. So she was relying on these animals to, fill her time and bring her joy. She also befriended the other cowboys working at the ranch, of course, but these times were very important, especially during the holiday when you were able to see people that you loved and come together and celebrate, those shared emotions of hope. So, of course, knowing that Herbert Timmons came to this area, he was new, he didn't know much about it. He was living in a 2-room house. His family didn't have much money. They weren't used to Christmases that were full of presents and multi-course meals. But this holiday dinner in 1894 was going to change everything. It was going to change the tone for him entirely because, as I said, he was personally invited by Miss Goodnight to her annual holiday dinner. So, of course, he put on his best outfit, and Christmas morning, he was ready to go. He was ready to make the long and kind of, well, long trip, meaning long pathway up to the Goodnight house. I mean, it was pretty long. It was about a quarter of a mile long. And it was lined with beautiful black locust trees, as you can see in this photo right here. So all the way from the train station to the Goodnight house, this pathway was lined with trees. And trees were relatively rare still in the Panhandle of Texas. So this really stood out and captivated anyone who was passing by. Herbert and his stepbrother, they made their way across the tracks. They went up this alley to the house, and they were then greeted by Miss Goodnight, who was awaiting them. They must have felt so much just inspiration by going up that pathway to the 2,500 square foot Goodnight house, coming from a house that was, not even close to being that size. Now, once they were inside Miss Goodnight, she led them to the receiving room, which we have a picture of on the right side. And there, Herbert and Lon sat down with Lizzie Dyer, Miss Goodnight's niece, and they played parlor games. They had darts, old maid, and checkers. And so they just played these games by the fireside until dinner was ready. They then made their way to the dining room where a table lit by 2 beautiful chandeliers awaited them. This stunned the boys who were not used to having a home lit during the daytime. That was a luxury that only few could afford. And then Miss Goodnight told everyone to sit, and she gave her blessing, which was an informal prayer before the feast began. So she then took her little red crystal bell and began ringing it as a way to signal Miss Tatum out of the kitchen. And they then started the first course, which Herbert was not too enthusiastic about. Miss Tatum put down on the table soup and pickles. Herbert thought to himself, I can get this at home. But soon enough, his doubts were cast aside as more and more dishes arrived on the dinner table. Turkey, roast beef, sweet and Irish potatoes, turnips, curled celery and green peas, even plum pudding. I'm sure some of you are wondering what curled celery is. I know I was a little confused by it. It just sounded super fancy, but it's just thinly sliced celery. That's all it is. It's exactly what it sounds like. And Victorians love to use it to garnish their meals and make them more appealing to the eye, especially during the holiday season when, putting on these dinners was all about the experience, the aesthetic. So having these beautiful pieces of curled celery resembling ribbon on your dinner table was a big deal. And then, of course, I mentioned plum pudding, which most of you probably have heard of. Now, coming into this, I just assumed plum pudding was pudding made out of plums. No, it's actually a cake made out of dried fruits and raisins. Victorians, they called raisins plums, which just blows my mind. Now today we call raisins raisins, but it was completely different back then. They quite literally had a different word for everything. I do have a question for all of you, and I want you to answer in the chat, but does your family have a lesser known dish that they serve during the holiday season? Let me know down below. I know in my family, we love Italian stuffing. It's basically just like Italian sausage, onions, and rice all mixed together with some cheese and it is so good. We didn't have it this year, so I was pretty upset about that. But back to the goodnight dinner table. So, Herbert watched as a proud Mr. Goodnight carved the bronze turkey on the table. It was the largest one from his flock and set aside for this special occasion. The other 30 turkeys from his flock had been sent to family, friends, and neighbors as far as Denver, Dallas, and even Kansas City. So not only could they afford to have a flock of bronze turkeys, they could afford to send them everywhere. Isn't that crazy? Just spectacular knowing that they were putting this much effort into giving back to their community near and far. Now, to Mr. Goodnight, a bronze turkey from his flock was the highest gift he could ever give, and he told this to Herbert as he sat down and ate his meal. Victorians were absolutely obsessed with bronze turkeys because they were considered some of the best for their taste, quality, and texture. A lot of people who could afford them would have them at holiday dinners or they would raise them and eventually kill them and then gift them to different people that they knew. Because that's what you did back then. If you had money and you could afford to do such a thing, you did it because it was the right thing to do. Now, the reason they're called bronze turkeys is because in the sunlight, their feathers glisten with this beautiful green bronze appearance. Today, sadly, bronze turkeys are not, well, they're not popular, but also they're extremely rare. Uh, they really stopped become, you really stopped seeing them on people's dining room tables in the mid 20th century. And as a result, they went into decline, and today they're on the endangered species list. So, today they're quite rare, but even back then it was a luxury to have them on your table. And so I'm sure Herbert just absolutely loved the fact that he was able to feast on such a delicacy. Now, every person sitting down at the goodnight dining room table was satisfied with both food and conversation. No one felt left out. And eventually, once the meal concluded, Herbert then followed Mr. Goodnight into his den, which was just across the hallway. Mr. Goodnight had a surprise for Herbert, and Herbert was just going to be blown away by this. But Charles showed Herbert his 6-foot long buffalo gun. So you can imagine a gun 6 feet long, extremely heavy. Herbert could barely handle it. So he let Mr. Goodnight hold on to it, but he got to see it and he was just blown away by it. Charles then showed Herbert some of the hides that he had on the floor. From previous hunts, he had killed buffalo and bears, so those were scattered about the floor. And if you visit the house today, you will also see some animal hides on the floor. He also got to see skins hanging on the walls in the den of skunk, deer, antelope, even wolf that Mr. Goodnight had. And then after this, Charles let Herbert literally cock his old cavalry pistol from his days as a Texas Ranger. So these moments were just so inspiring to little Herbert. And as the night went on and on, they looked at other things on the wall in the den. There were a few paintings that were painted from when Goodnight lived at the J.A. Ranch. And Goodnight told Herbert that in one of the paintings, the fog was carefully added over the course of a day and a half by the artist. So this artist really took his time to capture the mystical beauty of Palo Duro Canyon, which I would imagine is hard to do. Finally, the night ended with a Mexican blanket. You're probably wondering, what, a Mexican blanket? Well, Mr. Goodnight joked that it was the only thing that he could show for his $90,000 investment in a Mexican silver mine that went bust. And so after he showed Herbert and his stepbrother Lon the blanket, he mentioned that they had better stick to cattle if they want to live a good life. Unfortunately for Herbert, he wouldn't do that, but that doesn't mean he didn't grow up to become, a successful person, right? He actually ended up having a family, getting married, and moving to Amarillo and working for the post office there for over 43 years. So he found success in his own way, but he often remembered this time in his life because it brought him so much joy, and he felt the love that the Goodnights had for not only him, but the community of Goodnight. It really just reflects their generosity and how they gave back no matter what, and I don't know about you, but it makes me feel warm and cozy just remembering this story and what it meant to young Herbert. So now let's move on and let's kind of explore other stories from the Goodnight Ranch that tie into the holiday season. So I love this photo because it's so rare and it's so beautiful. It shows Mary Ann in her buggy, which is being, guided by two horses, and it's her and a young Cleo Hubbard. Cleo was a boy that the Goodnights helped raise. They actually never had children of their own, but their housekeeper, Ella Hubbard, had a young son, and he came to the Goodnight Ranch as an infant. And the Goodnights took in Ella and her son, and they spent their entire lives living at the Goodnight Ranch. So this is really neat to see this history happening in this photo here. But Mary Ann, she absolutely loved taking her horse-drawn buggy into town, and she would give all the little ones in Goodnight homemade peppermint sticks and chocolates, and they loved her so much they called her Aunt Molly. And another thing that the Goodnights would do during the holiday season is give out thoughtful gifts, so toys and new shoes. And so everyone in Goodnight was able to go home with something during the holiday season, even if their family couldn't afford such things. They knew the Goodnights were going to take good care of them. Whether you were just passing through the town or you were a local, the Goodnights always welcomed people at their ranch. It was cozy inside. They had 3 fireplaces lit, and people were ready to get warm after being outside probably for what seemed like days on the plains, since that wind never stops. But everyone was ready to just relax and enjoy these fires. And then once the day was starting to come to an end, they knew that they had a guest room waiting upstairs for them because the Goodnights were willing to give them a place to stay since there was no hotel in town. Now, another sight that you would have seen in the Goodnight home is students sitting by the fireside. Actually, there was a college located in Goodnight. It's called Goodnight College, and it began in 1898 with the help of the Goodnights and the Methodist Church. So the Goodnights poured a lot of money into this school because they wanted to make sure that these families had access to an education in the plains, since back then there were few schools and resources available to people. Not only that, but the Goodnights, they would slaughter bison from their herd and they would allow students to eat this meat from their herd so that they could sustain themselves while receiving this education. They actually grew very tired of eating bison, and though they were tired of it, they also were quite thankful for the Goodnights stepping in and feeding them while they attended Goodnight College. Students also could afford to attend Goodnight College because the Goodnights had a stipulation that if you came to their ranch and you worked, they would pay for your housing and your tuition. So many people who came from families that didn't have a lot of money were able to receive an education because of the Goodnights. So I think it's so neat. And lo and behold, Herbert Timmons was the first student at Goodnight College, and he was always grateful um, for the Goodnights and how they were diligent in providing him and his family opportunities out in the frontier of Texas. After the closure of Goodnight College in 1917, it became Buckner's orphanage and housed several children without families. Marianne made sure to include them in special activities around Christmas, such as her annual holiday dinners and, of course, the gifting of presents. In the cold, windswept backdrop of the southern Great Plains, these moments and places were so important in sustaining the community that was Goodnight. The love, joy, and appreciation the Goodnights showed their community were especially evident during the holiday season, leaving a legacy that continues to resonate today. These values are the heart of what makes the holidays so meaningful. Universal emotions of connection and generosity that we all strive to embrace. Whether it's a friend, a distant family member, or a neighbor, let us remember to include those we cherish and ensure no one feels left behind, just like the Goodnights did for Herbert Timmons and the pioneer families of Goodnight, Texas. As you gather around the table this year, let their example inspire us to open our hearts and our homes. This season, make a difference. Share kindness, foster connection, and create memories that embody the holiday spirit. If you love this program today, please keep in touch with us on social media. We actually have a great program lineup for next year that is going to explore the marriage between Victorian and cowboy culture. It's called Leather and Lace. And I feel like Charles and Marianne are the perfect examples of this through their marriage. I mean, she was the proper Victorian lady, and he was the rough and tough cowboy. And so they very much had an interesting dynamic. So please either come to the site. We often do live stream our programs on our page, so you can attend that way too. But I just want to thank you so much for attending this program today. And if you have any questions for me, please don't hesitate to ask. Thank you.
Yay, thank you so much, Madeline. That last picture is stunning.
Isn't it
Um,
stunning? Yeah, I
I love
absolutely
it.
love it.
Y'all, I was just telling Madeline I need to get my butt out to Amarillo to get to that site, but
Do.
gotta
And
find the time.
it's crazy to think that this is the first historic site in the Texas Panhandle, and the state only acquired it 3 years ago. But it's
Wow.
so important not only to local history here in the Panhandle, but to the rest of Texas because Charles Goodnight did so many wonderful things for Texas, and so did his wife Mary Ann. So we just love telling their stories because they're so significant.
Yeah, I love that. Well, y'all, first of all, I've really loved watching. My favorite question that you asked was the food question, and we've got some folks that somebody wrote that they have boiled custard.
Well,
Somebody said they have eggs Benedict on Christmas morning. So, Patty, I'd love to come to your house for Christmas morning. But if y'all have any questions about anything in the presentation about Goodnight Ranch, please drop them in the chat. Oh, somebody said they have tamales on Christmas Eve. They go out for Tex-Mex on the 26th. All right, y'all. I'm coming to your house. All right. So Terry asked, do people still leave bandanas at his gravesite fence? She's
yes,
already
they
asked.
do. They do. And, I have yet to do it. And I always beat myself up because anytime I'm at Hobby Lobby, I go right by these bandanas. I'm like, Madeline, you need to buy a bandana and leave it at the good knight's grave because that's how people pay their respects to them to this day. You'll just see a bunch of them hanging from the fence around their grave site. It's a beautiful thing to witness every time I visit, um, and just speaks to their influence. It goes far and wide. It really does. I mean, we get people from Europe, California, uh, where I'm from, St. Louis. We get people from St. Louis. It's mind blowing. Oh, Whataburger sells bandanas. I didn't know that.
Well, that is like, that's perfect. All right. Does anybody have any other questions? And, if you wake up in the middle of the night and think of something, you can always email us and let
Absolutely.
us know. We're always happy to answer
Yeah.
questions. Let me make sure I'm not missing anything here.
Yeah, because I didn't even really get to see your questions or anything. So
Yeah, I mean,
okay.
we had, folks answered your questions. A lot of answers for the beginning, like what do they think about Christmas? Family, gathering of family, the birth of Christ. But the food question was definitely my favorite. Oh, I missed this one. Homemade mincemeat pie with venison.
And
Wow.
minced meat pie was also very popular with Victorians. I do believe the Goodnights had that on occasion. What's unfortunate is we don't actually know a lot about what they did during Christmas. The only story we have is from Herbert Timmons, and it's a beautiful story, and it's one of the reasons why we love to tell it because it's a prime example of what a Victorian Christmas looked like here out on the plains of Texas. Um, and so it's just awesome that we have it. We don't have any interior photos of the house from when the Goodnights lived here. We only have exterior photos. Heck, I had a hard time even finding any pictures regarding Herbert Timmons. I couldn't find any. However, I did find a photo of his dad, but I was like, I'll just include photos of the early homes that were here in Goodnight. Sadly, they don't stand anymore today. But we are lucky enough to have the cemetery. We're lucky enough to have the ranch, of course. And there are a few Sears catalog homes in Goodnight that are still standing. So really cool.
I love that. Well, I think we're slowing down in the chat. If anybody, oh, we've got another
Ooh, that's a
question.
good question.
Oh, she can see
Okay.
it. You want to
So
read it out loud just so everybody can
the
hear?
question is, where are the archives housed in order to do research on the Goodnights? Well, you're more than welcome to come out to the ranch and we can answer any questions you may have. We do have a few documents that will probably help aid your research. Also, Panhandle Plains Historical Museum in Canyon, Texas, that is the best archives there is regarding the Goodnights. You can find almost anything and everything there is to know about the Goodnights there. I went there, I almost said last year. This year is almost over, so it feels like it was last year. But I mean, you can find photos of the house, of the Goodnights. You can find letters. Those were my favorite. things to read when I visited were the letters because it's so personal. I mean, you're really getting an inside look at what life was like for them here. Um, I believe it's the Haley Library in Midland. I think they also have a great archives. And then Portal to Texas History, which is online. It's free to use. Definitely recommend that. Also, some of the information that I got comes from this book that they digitized called Panhandle Pilgrimage. That is also on uh, Portal to Texas History. So check that out too.
Um, Raylan says, I'm still thinking about the curled celery. I think as we all are. Did they grow it there on the ranch or did they buy it or did they bring it in or get it brought in from
You
somewhere else?
know, that is a really good question. I'm not sure about the celery, but I can tell you that the Goodnights did grow a lot of what they ate. And they often kept a buffet table set up in the dining room with a bowl of fresh produce, so that anyone visiting the ranch could just grab a little snack and then off they went. Also, Charles Goodnight was the first person in the Panhandle to grow wheat for his cattle, which is pretty cool. So while he was a rancher more than anything else, he was very much a farmer too. They had orchards. I know they grew, I want to say they grew, I'm trying to remember, apples. I think they grew peaches too, and maybe plums, but I would have to double check that because I know I learned a little bit about that. And then he also was obsessed with pecan trees later in life. He had a whole set of pecan trees towards the back of the property, and some of those are still standing today, but sadly they are dying. So there's not much life left in them, but it is neat to know that he planted those there. I'm glad you brought up Pueblo Historical Society and the Goodnight Barn, because they also are a great resource regarding their time in Pueblo, because not much is known about the Goodnight's time in Pueblo, but luckily we are able to learn a little bit about it from the Goodnight Barn and the Pueblo Historical Society. I'm actually due to visit the barn this week. So I'm excited because I'm going to Colorado Springs. So on my way there, I want to stop at the barn to see it and the Stock Growers Bank downtown in Pueblo. That still stands, and that was built with Charles Goodnight's money because he invested heavily in that downtown area in the early days of Pueblo, and that's one of the remaining structures from his time there. And then who lived in their home and cared for the ranch after they passed away. So what's interesting is that Mary Ann, she passed away in her bedroom in the house in 1926. Charles, however, he did not pass away in the house. He passed away in Tucson, Arizona. His second wife, Corinne Goodnight, she often would take him from Goodnight or Clarendon, wherever they were staying in Texas, and they would go straight to Arizona during the winter time because it was better for his health. As he got older, he really struggled with the wind here. And as you know, the Panhandle, it gets dusty when that wind picks up. So that was not good for his asthma. It was not good for his condition. And so while they were in Tucson, that's where he passed away at age 93. Now, the only owners to physically live in the Goodnight house are the Goodnights. Every owner after that was a silent owner. So they owned the ranch and the land around it, but they didn't actually live in the house. They hired people that worked the land and the ranch, and they lived in the house. So I think that's really interesting. And even though it's gone through 8 owners in total, it very much is still in its original condition. So it's awesome. Just awesome.
That's really interesting.
Yeah, it is mind-blowing, knowing that it's been through so many owners and yet it's still standing today and is very much original and authentic. But does anyone have any other questions for me on the good nights? Because I could talk about the good nights
We could be
all
here
day
all
long. I
day.
mean, it's my job, but I love it. It says Larry McMurtry based his story's main characters in Lonesome Dove on the cattle drives of Charles Goodnight and Oliver Loving.
Oh,
Certainly I do think he loosely based that story around the Goodnight Loving Trail. However, in real life, Gus McCrae, aka Oliver Loving, was a devoted husband, had several children, and was nothing like Gus McCrae. He was very much a good person, very religious, a family man, devoted husband, father, all of that. And I think the most beautiful thing about, the real story is after Loving passed away, Charles Goodnight continued to blaze the Goodnight Loving Trail, and he gave half of what he made to the family, even though Loving was gone. He wanted to make sure that his family had the means to survive and get by because he was that kind of person. He loved people and wanted to give back in any way that he could. And it's okay. The other question is from Ray Lynn. It says, is the house currently open? I was there not too long ago and it was closed for repairs. It is sadly still closed, but it's all for a good reason, I promise. So right now, the house is getting a new cedar shake roof and we restored the 5 chimneys that originally stood. So it's really neat to see it with 5 chimneys now, knowing that's what the Goodnights saw when they lived there. Because for a long time, there were only 3 chimneys, I believe. And so we took those down and we rebuilt them, and then we added the others, but they're more historically accurate because they had 5 chimneys when they lived there. The Goodnights did. So that's why there's 5 chimneys. Um, they had that main central chimney, and then there was a little stove in Cleo's room. And then I know that, of course, he had one in his den. And then there's 2 in the addition, which is where the dining room and the kitchen are. So 5 chimneys. Not to mention, one of those chimneys is connected to 3 fireplaces.
wow.
Okay, let's see. And I agree that the real story is more interesting than Lonesome Dove. I love the story of Charles Goodnight. It's so multifaceted and just filled with so many layers. Okay. There's a buffalo robe C. Goodnight gave to a Mary for allowing him to water his cattle on her property in Folsom, New Mexico. I didn't know that. That's really cool. Um, really cool. I'll have to visit Folsom Museum. That's really neat. I mean, and it makes sense because he went through that area on the Goodnight Loving Trail. And he still had ties to that area even after his trail days were over. I'm just seeing if anyone else has any more questions for me.
Y'all always come up with good questions. I always,
Yeah,
always have
these are
fun.
really good questions.
And Jane, I know you said it's not due till 2026, but
I'm excited, Jane.
we're on it. We'll
Jane can't
definitely want to
can't wait for
connect.
your book.
I'm sorry?
I can't wait for Jane's book because I absolutely adore Marianne and she just doesn't get the attention she deserves. Um, you know, I couldn't believe that I didn't know who she was before I moved here. I mean,
Oh,
that blew my mind because She was one woman and she did so much for the American bison. And not to mention, of course, her community, but just amazing.
I love that. All right, y'all. Well, if anything comes up again, feel free to throw it in the chat. We can, still hang on for a little bit. But if you wake up in the middle of the night, like I said, and have a pressing question, please feel free to reach out to either of us. Christy Peliquin will email everybody tomorrow with some contact information and just following up with the recording. So, we really appreciate y'all coming and supporting us, and we'll see some of y'all in February. We're talking
Um,
about the film.
they do need to make it into a film because it would be so epic.
Okay. Jane, just add that to your list of work. The book, the screenplay. I love
Um,
it. Thank y'all so much.
yeah, and we do get a lot of visitors at our site because they saw the Ken Burns documentary. I actually watched it before I moved here and started the job, and
Oh, cool.
I yeah, and I just didn't even realize how devastating it was on the plains in the 1870s with how many bison they killed. It's just unbelievable.
Wow.
Thank you guys. I really appreciate you coming out and supporting us. It means a lot.
It really does, y'all. Thank you. Everybody have a fantastic night, and we'll be in touch.
Oh, you said the Timmons were from East Texas.
Oh,
Do you
he's
know,
still on.
do
He's still
you
on if you
happen
want to
to know
answer that.
what area? Oh, I would have to look again. I couldn't tell you like the exact location, but I just know it was Wise County, Texas. I think that's in the Dallas area, I believe, Dallas Fort Worth area. Because I looked it up on Google Maps. I wanted to know exactly where it was. But yeah, it's a long way, to come to the plains from, an area that has many a trees. That would have been very different.
Love it. Love
Oh,
it.
Decatur,
Oh,
Bridgeport.
Decatur, Bridgeport.
Right.
Okay. Texas is very big.
It's so big.
All right. Merry Christmas. Thank
Merry
you. Thank
Christmas,
you.
everyone.
We love it. All right. I'm gonna go ahead and end it since we're hopping off. Again, thank you everyone. Look out for the email tomorrow, and we're always here for questions. Bye, y'all. Good night.
Bye.